From the Sunnyland Center and Gardens in Rancho Mirage, this is an Air Talk 30th anniversary on the road broadcast. Each month, we're celebrating our 3 decades of the show by visiting a community within our KPCC broadcast reach. Today, we're happy to be in the Coachella Valley, where KPCC is heard on both 90.3 out of Coachella and 93.3 out of Palm Springs. Now, Sunnylands is the 200-acre estate of TV Guide founder and philanthropist Walter Annenberg and his wife Leonore. The Annenbergs entertained Hollywood's biggest stars, royalty, and American presidents. President Obama was just here 2 weeks ago. Though the Annenbergs are no longer living, the family converted Sunnylands into a nonprofit center for civic conversations. And that's exactly what we're using it for today. And in fact, this is the first ever broadcast to come from Sunnylands in its history. So you're part of history today. Now, we're less than 4 months out from a California election which saw every Republican running for statewide executive office lose. The races weren't close. It's been 8 years since a Republican was elected statewide. The legislature is heavily Democratic, and GOP voter registration trails Dems by 15 percentage points. What is the future of the GOP here? Can it revive in a state that's growing less white and more socially liberal? Well, in a move toward inclusiveness, the state GOP voted to formally recognize the nearly 4-decade-old California Log Cabin Republicans. Its gay members continue to support the party despite the GOP's opposition to same-sex marriage. And with us today is the outgoing chairman of the California Log Cabin Republicans, Charles Moran. Thank you, Charles, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Congratulations, first of all. I know you've been working on this for many, many years. First of all, what does it feel like to be officially recognized by the state party?
Larry, thanks again for having us come. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge and thank you all for coming today. As a Republican and somebody who works within the party structure, the party would not be where it is today in the strength and the unification if we didn't have Walter and Lenore Annenberg as part of this, and potentially as the youngest person in this room. I think I need to acknowledge the fact that you don't know where you're going unless you know where you came from, and the impact that the Annenbergs have had and continue to have on the Republican Party is remarkable, and a lot of what happened had occurred here at Sunnylands. What happened over the weekend in Sacramento, the California Republican Party had its a convention, and at that time we concluded what was an 18-year struggle for recognition of Log Cabin Republicans as an official Republican volunteer organization, and we received our charter. Log Cabin Republicans is America's oldest and largest Republican volunteer organization, populated of both gays and lesbians, the LGBT community, and straight people. We were formed as a result of the Briggs Initiative, and Log Cabin came together at the behest of then Governor Ronald Reagan, who encouraged people in his network and in his friendship circle to band together to oppose what would have been a ban on open gays and lesbians serving as public school teachers in California. So to have the Republican Party, who had for so many years tried to marginalize and discount the impact of gay Republicans in the party, to formally embrace us. By the way, it was not a close vote. It was not just, all we needed was a simple majority. And it wasn't just a simple majority, it wasn't even a supermajority. It was an overwhelming landslide of 75% of the delegates in the room approving a charter for Log Cabin Republicans.
To what do you credit that? Because this is a party nationally, its platform doesn't include gay rights. What was it about California Republicans at this convention, the core of the party, that led to the support?
I attribute it to 2 main things. Primarily, it's the first part of it is our work within the party. Even though we're not necessarily 100% there, Ronald Reagan always said, 80% my friend is not 20% my enemy. And Ronald Reagan really does guide so much of this vision. They saw, the party members and the elected officials saw us knocking on doors, making those fundraising phone calls, making the voter contact, doing the things that we need to do to get Republicans elected when it was easy and when it was not so easy. So that was a big part of it. I think the other half of it is the fact that the Republican Party in California has really hit a crossroads and has shifted in the way that it is going to engage non-traditional communities who are part of our conservative fabric. And I attribute a lot of that to State Senator Jim Brulte, who has taken over and now has been reelected chairman of the California Republican Party. But you see it through the party's investment in projects like Grow Elect, reaching out to Latino communities and making sure that they're elected at the seat of the table. Just historically, in the last election, we saw a record number of Asian American Republicans elected to office, due in part of the work of the party. And now the LGBT community is being touched and reached out to by the California Republican Party, by our charter. We are not the first, but we are part of a line of strategic moves by the party to reach out and include the true diverse nature of Republicans, or excuse me, of Californians in the Republican Party.
And later we'll get to the challenge that presents with Latinos over immigration reform issues. But for gay men and lesbians, do you anticipate that this formal recognition of the Log Cabin Group is going to lead more conservative gay men and lesbians to say, yeah, I'm willing to register Republican? Absolutely.
Again, we are strong, solid Republicans. Our name, Log Cabin Republicans, has the word Republican in it for a reason. And part of it is we have now almost been deputized by the Republican Party to go out and say to our LGBT communities and really offer an invitation to understand conservative ideology, to understand who the Republican Party is and what we stand for, and say, while the party may not be with us 80% of the time, or may not be with us 20% of the time, that 80% is something you can identify with, and you have a home here. And while the party platform may not be 100% of where we would like it to be, we are offering you an invitation to come into the Republican Party, to be a part of it, and to understand and support our Republican candidates. And that is something we have not been able to officially say. You know, the party supports us coming to you and offering this invitation, and now it does.
How do you square, though, the party, which is still a powerful force, pushing against same-sex marriage, other issues of gay rights? How do you say to someone who comes to you and says, you know, Charles, I'd be interested, I'm a fiscal conservative, I think of myself as a Republican, but on this issue, I don't feel like who I am as a person is defended, represented by the party. What do you say to that person?
Chairman Jim Brulte has specifically said it is not the Republican Party platform that defines the party, it's our candidates. It's the people we present to the voters to have a choice. People don't vote for the party, they vote for the candidates. So it's the candidates that really do define the party. And in this last election cycle, we had people like Neil Kashkari run for governor of California, who is the first Republican gubernatorial candidate to march in a gay pride parade, which he did in San Diego. Mayor Kevin Faulconer, who we just flipped from a philandering fool who had been the mayor of San Diego, basically got drummed out of office, and we elected Kevin Faulconer as the new Republican mayor of San Diego, in America, one of America's largest cities, which is a feat in itself, and he chairs the Conference of Mayors Supporting Marriage Equality. There is great diversity within the Republican Party. We all know this through the conservative constituencies, and that diversity is reflected in Log Cabin Republicans and in the gay and lesbian community. So for people who say, well, the platform isn't quite there, look at some of these candidates. We have beacons of light in this party, and we're going to continue to support them.
Charles Moran with us, the outgoing chairman of the Log Cabin Republicans of California. Also with us, the director of the UC Davis Center for Regional Change's Civic Engagement Project, Mindy Romero. Thank you for traveling down from Davis to join us. We appreciate it very much.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So there's clearly a huge demographic challenge. You know, despite what Charles is saying about diversity within the party, it is still very heavily white. It is still very heavily male. This is a state that is split pretty evenly between whites and Latinos and is only becoming more Latino. Mm-hmm. Are Republicans going to be able to attract Latino voters without immigration reform?
That's the question, isn't it? There's three things that the Republican Party would be wise to engage in if they want to extend their relevance and they want to continue to be, or be more competitive, I should say. One would be to really, for the leadership and others, to really understand and accept that there is demographic change and that you can't counter demographic change that you just mentioned with mobilization or getting your base out. That's still part of the narrative nationally. We can overcome if we target our base more, but that ship has sailed here in California. Understanding that, and granted there's quite a large geographic variance across the state, but for the most part it's sailed. And then number two, understanding that to get to your question, demographic change, population change, doesn't just automatically mean that you have more Democrats. Right now, there's a strong affiliation for Latinos, where they lean heavily Democrat. But if you look historically, California in the 80s and early 90s was a Republican stronghold. Latinos were actually a big part of that reality. And not until about not until 1994 and Prop 187, we could talk more about that if you wanted to, but not until that change and a few other things that came along did Latinos start to go into the open arms of the Democratic Party. And so really it was a change that happened due to the actions of many people believe, due to the actions of the Republican Party itself. But
you're talking about Prop 187?
187, 209, 227, and a lot of rhetoric and a lot of public language that was used then and since. However, what that means, though, if it's an issue that the Republican Party created, it also means that it's one that the Republican Party can potentially change. So political realities, there's always ebbs and flows.
Well, let's talk.
I was just going to say number three would be then doing deep targeting and changing the narrative to attract Latinos into the party.
So let's talk about what some of those changes might have to be. For example, immigration reform, it would seem there needs to be some sort of deal made on that. Mm-hmm. But there's also the issue, social issues, because my guess would be that those Latinos who were Republicans in the past were social conservatives. The research that I see on millennials, and you know this stuff much better than I do, is that they're much more collectivist, including millennials of color, and that they are socially more liberal than their predecessors. You can say maybe over time they'll become more conservative as they start their own businesses, become homeowners, but maybe they won't. Maybe this group is different in the future the same way they're different now. Then what do Republicans do?
You know, I think getting to that issue of the larger narrative. So right now, for anyone to mobilize a Latino vote, you have to have this deep contact. You have to not just put a door hanger or whatever it is, we still do door hangers, or call or get somebody in front of a market. You have to connect, particularly for Latinos that have been historically disconnected. You have to talk about their realities, their community, why it matters to vote, period, and why it matters to vote for this candidate and what this candidate will do for your community, right, in really tangible, real ways. But before you can even do that, you have to change the larger narrative, this understanding that many Latinos have that and we're speaking generalizations here, but that the Republican Party has been anti-Latino or hasn't spoke or hasn't certainly cared or addressed the issues of the Latino community. And so you have to take care of this larger issue, and immigration reform has been part of that. So it's not just that Latinos want to see immigration reform. There's actually, if you look at surveys, of course, there's a wide variation. But it's that immigration reform and the language around immigration reform. Whether an individual Latino family how they actually feel about immigration reform themselves, when they hear it discussed out in the media, right, it sounds very divisive. It sounds, to many people, like an attack.
A good example of this is Proposition 187.
Exactly.
When it was originally polled, Latinos actually supported it among likely voters. And that really flipped very quickly to be perceived as hostile to Latinos, as really targeted at them. And of course, it lost dramatically among the Latino vote. But the initial response was positive out of the gate. We'll continue with our guest from beautiful Sunnylands in Rancho Mirage. It's an Air Talk 30th anniversary on the road special program. We'll continue with more right after this update. All right. We're ready to roll with part two. From the Sunnyland Center and Gardens in Rancho Mirage, it's an Air Talk 30th Anniversary on the Road special. I'm Larry Mantle. Great to have you with us this afternoon as we're talking about the future of the Republican Party in California. One big piece of this, of course, is the dramatically increasing number of independent voters in the state who don't like either political party to affiliate with. Is that open for Republicans or for anyone else? Our next guest is Pete Peterson, who heads Pepperdine University's Davenport Institute for Public Engagement. He made the runoff for California Secretary of State, but lost to Democrat Alex Padilla 54 to 46%. Pete Peterson, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Great to be with you.
So you were one of these new generation Republicans really poised to potentially win this seat in a Democratic dominant state. You had the advantage of editorial board endorsements from most of the state's top liberal-leaning editorial boards. Fresno Mayor Ashley Swearingen also had those endorsements for controller.
Right.
She lost, you lost. What happened?
Well, it was reported by the LA Times I was outspent 8-1. And while money isn't everything in politics, it certainly does help. I think there are, a lot of different headwinds that we ran into in our race. Some of it for me was just the simple fact that I was an unknown. I had never run for statewide office before. After one of the Ed Board meetings, by the way, I finished up, this was up in San Francisco, and one of the editorial page editors came over to me and said, Pete, you did really well here. I can't say who we're going to endorse, but, you did very well. But the problem is you're a Republican. And I said, well, if I were a Democrat, I wouldn't be within 10 miles of this seat, right? There's a certain advantage to being what, Will Rogers had that great line about, I'm a member of no organized party, I'm a Democrat. You could say the same thing right now of Republicans. And
you looking at the House of Representatives or something as you say that?
Well, and I would say even here in the California context, there are advantages to being the outsider party. And I think one of the advantages is that you don't have a machine that's dictating 4, 6, 8 years out who's going to be running for these offices. So the person I was running against, who's now the current Secretary of State, I don't have much doubt that that was pre-programmed on somebody's calendar 4, 6 years ago. And here I am really coming out of nowhere, a Republican from Santa Monica, of all places, making it into the top 2. So that doesn't get you to win, but I think one of the great encouraging things that I learned on the campaign trail from so many Democrats who said that I'd be the first Republican they'd vote for was, number one, I wasn't a politician, although I was playing one over the course of 18 months. And number two, I actually had a plan for the job I was running for, right? I had a passion, and still do, obviously, given the work I do at Pepperdine, for this field of civic participation. And I think that was a message that certainly did connect with editorial boards that had seen, for a lot of these statewide offices, candidates seeing it as just merely a stepping stone.
But what would it take for someone like yourself, moderate Republican, who's got all kinds of credentials for the job you're running for? I mean, you're very well suited for that job.
Right.
And the most favorable, except for money, the most favorable thing you can have is it just add money to the mix and a Republican can win statewide, or more than that?
Well, it might just take 4 more years. Right? I mean, I think money is going to be a part of that, but I think part of the reason, part of this discussion is highlighting, one, that there are some significant changes going on within the Republican Party in California. And I would also throw out, and maybe this could be something for a later discussion, that we are also competing against a party that I think is demonstrating in the Democrats some significant fissures or fault lines. I think that we're seeing that now even play out in this California Senate race for 16, this split between Latinos and the African-American wing of the party. I think we're seeing this between public sector and private sector unions and the sustainability of our public sector services. I think we're also seeing this in the area of environmental regulation and middle and lower middle class jobs.
if there is an economic implosion from public employee pensions, do you think the Republican Party is poised to be able to get more support, or do you think Democrats, if they see this, if they see, you know, the rock rolling down the hill faster and faster, are going to be able to make adjustments and not lose voters?
I think actually both of those are untrue, right? So I don't think Democrats are going to be able to pull away from the support they get from public sector unions. At the same time, I'm not sure Republicans are going to be ready to take advantage of it. One of the things I tried to discuss in my campaign was really to talk about Republicans as being the party of performance and to reconnect with our reform history as a party, specifically here in California. I think, unfortunately, we're seen as a party that, as was once quoted by Grover Norquist, wanted to get government small enough that you could drown it in a bathtub. And I think, unfortunately, there are a lot of people, aside even from the social issues, that would really connect with a reform-minded Republican Party. They've seen what's happened not far from here in San Bernardino. They understand that government is changing, that we've made promises fiscally that are unsustainable. But they look to the Republicans, and we're seen as a party that rhetorically, I think, more than actually, wants to basically run the car into a wall. And I think if we want to have a chance to get the votes of what I would call the fiscal conservative wing of independents as well as Democrats, we need to put forward a set of platforms and plans that's not about drowning government in the bathtub so much as it is making government more transparent, making it more responsive, and doing things that put us on a more fiscally sustainable course.
And the challenge is in how you make that narrative sexy enough to attract voters.
Yeah.
Because the mantra, hosting the show I do, having Republican elected officials on almost daily, it's the same themes over and over again. You know, government overreach, we need smaller government, we need less regulation, businesses, all these may well be core values of Republicans and are in fact core values, but it's difficult to make those sing to the rest of the population.
Well, and I would just say, and I've written about this, and I certainly talked about it quite a bit on the campaign trail, this small government, large government discussion is ridiculous, right? It's not getting at the real issue. As someone who studies public policy and works with cities around the state, the one thing that most people in public policy know that government is actually getting smaller as measured by the number of employees, but it's getting more expensive because we've made these unsustainable fiscal obligations to retirees. In the next 5 years, we will have more public sector workers on pension than filling potholes, walking the beat, and teaching our kids. And that's a set of issues that I think Republicans, much more than Democrats, are well positioned to be making arguments about reform.
We're coming your way from Sunnylands, the Air Talk 30th Anniversary Tour, for our March program talking about the future of California's Republican Party. Also with us is Ruben Barrales, who is President and CEO of the Political Action Committee Grow Elect. Its mission is to cultivate and support Republican Latino candidates for statewide and local offices. We appreciate your being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
So what's the toughest challenge that you have in identifying and convincing talented, young, conservative Latinos to run for office as Republicans?
I think you just answered that by asking the question. You know, it's tough to be an active Hispanic in many parts of California and be a Republican, and because of the brand, the problem with the brand. And you know, if a party has one job, it's to help elect its candidates. It's to register voters. In California today, the Republican Party, on a good day, makes up nearly 29% of the registered voters in California. It's a long way between 29% and 50% to win an election. So, you know, our point is you have to grow. You know, you grow or you die, and that couldn't be any truer a situation than for the Republican Party in California. So our approach is to identify those young Latinas, young Latinos who care about civic life in California. From our perspective, who are basically center-right, who care about freedom, free enterprise, opportunity, free markets, who care about issues like the looming pension bubble that we're facing in the public sector, and we help them then get involved and encourage them to run for office.
Of course, the disadvantage, I mean, the Democratic Party has so many Latino elected officials to help mentor younger people. You've got labor unions, which really are sources of Latino political power with funding to back candidates. How do Republicans develop, and I'm not saying this to knock your group, I think, you know, this is one model, a PAC like this, but to make something more broad-based to nurture those candidates, how do you do it?
Well, we're much more than a PAC. I mean, we do give money. Money is important in these races, but what's more important is developing a network statewide, helping these candidates or potential candidates in terms of the issues that they're facing as candidates, and even more importantly, as elected officials. So we're developing a network, a culture supporting Hispanic Republicans. I was actually the first and the only Hispanic Republican elected county supervisor in my home county of San Mateo, and there wasn't a lot of support. I mean, it's you know, we're a laissez-faire party, so it's kind of run on your own. You know, good luck.
Good luck. Yeah.
So I think it's important though to develop a network of support because, yeah, quite frankly, the Democrats have that especially with the public sector unions. They have a safety net for their candidates. We really don't have one, especially in the Latino community.
You know, give us an idea. What is sort of the prime, if you're to go out in the field and find sort of the most prime candidate, what kind of experience does that person have? Where do they come from? What's their story that you think would help make them competitive?
You know, it depends on the situation. We've helped to elect a 23-year-old Latina Republican in Southeast LA to a municipal office. We've supported a gentleman, a retired businessman, a Latino, 72 years old, who went precinct walking in almost every voter household in his community. It varies. It's really more someone, from our perspective, who's in touch with their community, who's involved with their community, and wants to make it better. And we will support them in that regard. So, you know, everyone sees it differently, and I don't know if it's a blue and black dress or a white and gold dress, but you know, everyone sees it differently. But you know, we're going to support Hispanics, again, who care about free enterprise, or however you want it, you know, people who can balance a budget and care about providing services in their communities, because I'll get off my soapbox with this, because a lot of these problems, whether it relates to education, the need for education reform or improving student standards, performance, or pension reform issues, the largest growing demographic in our state happen to be Hispanics. So guess who's going to be holding the bag if you take this out 20, 40, 60 years from now, if we're not educating our kids, if we're not reforming our pension systems to a point where we have sustainable public services.
Also with us is Jack Pitney, longtime expert on the Republican Party. He's seen its ups and downs over the decades. He's Crocker Professor of Politics at Claremont McKenna College. Good afternoon, Jack. Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
You know, even though I'm celebrating Air Talk's 30th anniversary, I'm not all that old, but I've seen some wild swings in parties here in California. Before President Reagan's election, you know, Democrats were in the driver's seat. Then there was the whole coattails effect of Ronald Reagan's win and Republican resurgence. Democrats were knocked back into the ropes. Now we've got a period where it's Democrats who dominate. Do you see any of this as cyclical, or do you think there's something distinctly different about the parties this time around?
Well, there definitely is a cyclical element to it, and you can go back to the 1990s. There's a couple of different things happened all at the same time. Number one, we've had mention of Prop 187 and the issue of immigration. That was hurtful to the party, though it wasn't by itself decisive. Number two, you had the end of the Cold War and a change in the state's economy. Used to have large numbers of defense jobs in the Los Angeles area. They're gone, and the employment growth has been in the service industries, different demographic profile. The people who work in those industries tend to be Democratic. Number three, had, in addition to the Prop 187 issue, you simply had an increase in immigration, and the number of new voters coming on tended to be more of the Democratic profile. So it was a perfect storm of these three things happening all at once. But as you mentioned before, again, things are cyclical. Just because a demographic group votes one way at a particular time doesn't necessarily mean that voting pattern is going to extend indefinitely. And we're going to see change as people get older, as people move into different economic categories, and as the issues change in the years ahead. And the things that everybody here has been talking about could contribute to changing the conversation and changing the voting behavior.
How big an issue do you think international relations, national security is, and the perception of threat from abroad? Can that be a driver in statewide elections, or is that irrelevant to what happens in elective office here in California?
It tends to be more relevant to national elections. State and federal elections often operate on different tracks. So I wouldn't necessarily say that developments in Ukraine are going to have anything to do with county supervisorial elections in San Bernardino. But it does contribute to the party brand, the party image, and the effect is indirect. What will happen in the years ahead is very much uncertain. We simply do not know what the next 10 years are going to bring. We don't know what the next year is going to bring. At this stage in, say, the 1979 cycle, for instance, the Soviet Union still hadn't invaded Afghanistan. The Iranian hostage crisis hadn't started yet. So we don't know what developments are going to shape the 2016 election for good or ill.
Jack, we need a break, but just real quickly, I want to ask you about the top two finishers in the primary, also the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. How helpful were these to Republican candidates, and will they become more so?
I think the jury's kind of out on top two. The idea behind it, Governor Schwarzenegger was very strongly in support that it would moderate the Republican Party, that by forcing candidates to appeal to more centrist, more independent voters. Really hard to tell at this stage. There's some signs it's done that, but we'll see how the votes go in the legislature and how members of Congress behave. As far as redistricting goes, some of the seats have in fact become more competitive. The Republicans had some close calls and probably would have picked up several more House seats if the National Party had been more supportive of Republican House candidates.
We'll continue from Sunnylands in Rancho Mirage. It's Air Talk's 30th anniversary on the road tour, talking with a variety of Republicans and experts about the future of the Republican Party here in California. We'll also have an opportunity for them to freewheel it a bit more as we continue. We'll be back right after this news update. All right, we're continuing. From the Sunnylands Center and Gardens in Rancho Mirage, this is the Air Talk 30th anniversary tour. Every month we're visiting a different part of California to talk about the biggest issues to members of our audience. Today it's the future of the Republican Party in California, whether it's going to become more competitive for statewide executive offices. Joining me, a distinguished panel, Ruben Barales, who is President CEO of Grow Elect, looking to nurture Latino Republicans for office. Charles Moran, who is the outgoing chairman of the California Log Cabin Republicans. Pete Peterson, former Secretary of State candidate and the director of Pepperdine's Davenport Institute for Public Policy. Jack Pitney, professor of politics at Claremont McKenna, and Mindy Romero of UC Davis's Center for Regional Change, where she heads up the Civic Engagement Project. So we've talked about a number of the important issues, but you may throw out some of the others here, and that is just general disinterest on the part of California voters. We got low turnout generally. Fewer people are affiliating with a particular party. What would it take for Republicans to start connecting with those that are disaffected, either sitting it out or say, I don't want to be part of either of these parties? Who wants to jump in on this?
Well, I think
Ruben Barales?
Yeah, I think you need to talk about some of the things that Pete was mentioning. You know, I think you have to address real issues that Californians are facing. There are a lot of issues, we're talking about statewide issues, under the dome in Sacramento, that people don't perceive touching their lives. There are a lot of turf wars, a lot of interest there. So I think you need to address issues that touch people's lives.
What's an example
So
of something?
a couple of those, again, we talked about pension reform. That is going to continue to be a problem, and we need to address it. And I think on either side of the aisle, whoever is able to address it in a meaningful way will gain some political capital. Education reform as well. I think if someone, I know in minority communities, if you're able to help provide quality education for kids in low-income communities in an effective and sustainable way, you're making a difference in their lives, and you will gain some political capital there as well.
Okay, and education, a good topic. How could Republicans better exploit that issue? Because often what we hear about is portability, is vouchers, is more competition from the private sector for that. I don't get a sense that in large numbers that connects with a large part of the California electorate. That's more an ideological perspective. So how can Republicans connect more on that issue? Pete Peterson?
Well, again, I would put this under the broader rubric of being the party of performance in government, right? And so I think it's not simply about charters, vouchers, things like that. It is my school district performing, and can I, as a citizen, have a way of understanding whether my kids are performing better here than in a neighboring school district or within a charter school within my district? And I think in part, technology, and this was certainly part of my campaign, and I think something that connected with people across the spectrum, technology is moving us to a place where we can better understand how our tax dollars are being spent and the performance of government itself. And I think actually this is a very, very exciting time to be a citizen in California, because I think there are not only a lot of experiments happening in how services are being offered, but governments are having to be very creative in how transparent they are in front of the public, and also evaluating the performance of the different services that they offer.
Let's talk about what's a huge issue, but people's eyes glaze over unless they're looking to develop something, and that's California Environmental Quality Act, which allows for extensive review of development projects. Republican members of the legislature have been hammering on this. CEQA has got to be revised to allow for construction to meet the growing population, to cut down on lawsuits that keep developers and builders from being able to do their projects. But Californians are also environmentally minded. They want reviews. And furthermore, many Californians are NIMBYs and don't want high-density projects built right next to where they live and can use CEQA to fight that. So how does the Republican Party crack that nut?
Well, I think it's about building coalitions. I was just in a meeting up in Sacramento a couple weeks ago in which an affordable housing advocate who's probably never voted for a Republican was really holding forth on the problems around environmental regulation, and specifically CEQA, in preventing affordable housing from being built in a lot of the cities that she worked with. I think for Republicans, we're not going to automatically add 15% of the electorate to our registration numbers. We're going to have to build coalitions with people who may not be registered Republicans, but nonetheless we can find common ground on a lot of these issues. And I think the environmental regulation piece, not just around CEQA, but also what environmental regulation is doing to really hurt lower middle class manufacturing jobs in this state, is something that Republicans really need to get out ahead of.
Mindy Romero, did I see you wanting to come in on that? I may have just misinterpreted your...
Oh, I can, yes.
Yeah, please.
Well, I was going to say something a bit broader. Piggybacking on what you had said earlier about independence or no party preference increases in California, just to point out that I think this is really the debt disconnection that you talked about. That really is an opportunity on both sides. It's happening across the board. Younger voters, older voters, that's why we had record low turnout, a huge factor in why we had record low turnout. And we do see that now, most recent numbers, 23% of all those registered in California are NPP. Democrats declining a little bit. We've seen tremendous declines for Republicans. However, if we break that up a bit, if we look at the youth vote, those 18 to 24, NPP and Democrat, they're almost the same, only about a percentage point difference. In about a majority of the counties in California, NPP is actually the #1 registration. I say that to say that we're kind of in uncharted territory. We're very much so in uncharted territory. This disconnection, and there's a little bit of a chicken and egg kind of thing, what came first, but still, the reality is, as you have folks that are registering, and young folks that are registering in huge percentages NPP, they are more, no matter how they got there, then going forward, they're definitely more disconnected from the political parties. And parties are trying to figure out how to get to these voters now as they've increased.
And can Republicans be perceived as cool enough that millennials, as they age, are willing to become Republican voters?
Well, and here's the kicker. So generally, as you mentioned earlier, we all know that as folks age, they tend to get more conservative, right? But with NPP, the uncharted territory is that we're seeing such huge numbers. We don't know if this will stick. This may stick for many of these younger voters. And what does that mean going forward when folks don't have a party? Because party affiliation is huge. It's a huge predictor of turnout, period, but who you vote for, all of that, right? But it also means that you get information, you get those door hangers, you get those calls. That's why you turn out to vote. But you also form your opinions and who you want to vote. Yeah. So without that, it leaves things open, potentially, and it does leave open folks on both sides, right, or potentially other parties to court those NPP folks in a different kind of way than has been in the past, just for the sheer numbers alone.
If you look, though, at this age cohort, and Jack, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, they are less religious, they are socially liberal, they are generally more collectivist than previous generations, even at this younger age. Mm-hmm. I mean, that doesn't bode well for the GOP unless the GOP is going to move in that direction or something else happens. Does this even potentially open up another party to come in to erode Democratic support?
I think the barriers to another party are pretty steep, but Newt Gingrich said that the whole idea of a political party is you're going to have disagreements. If everybody thinks the same way and acts the same way, that's nice, but it's a very small party and you don't win elections. It's the nature of coalitions to have disagreements. So I think these things are manageable. But let me raise another issue. The people don't ordinarily associate with Republicans, but perhaps ought to, and that's disabilities. Here in this state, the great champion of disabilities was a man named Frank Lanterman. Frank Lanterman was a Republican. The Lanterman Act was signed by Governor Ronald Reagan. At the national level, you had President George H.W. Bush sign the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was championed by Bob Dole. And even more recently, the Combating Autism Act was prime sponsored by Rick Santorum, who is not anybody's idea of a liberal. The reason this works for Republicans is the idea with disabilities legislation is to integrate people with disabilities into society so they can get on the job roles and not be dependent. And I think this is an opportunity for Republicans to emphasize this and something they ought to do more of.
Charles Moran?
One of the things that I wanted to highlight is, unfortunately, this last weekend at the California Republican Party convention, the primary things that people will remember this convention for is chartering Log Cabin, and then also a discussion about whether or not we call people illegal aliens or illegal immigrants. And given the fact of the dire circumstance of the party and the dire circumstance of the state of California, that this is what the party is going to be known for, we've got to do a better job at rebranding ourselves and reemphasizing what our values are. I mean, we have companies like Microsoft and Apple and Google that are all based here, and the things that do resonate to younger people are issues that deal with technology, that deal with privacy, personal freedoms. These are all things that the Republican Party is championing. So why is it that what we're arguing about and the only thing that's creating the controversy and we're focusing on are these social issues, but the Republicans absolutely are taking a leadership role in some of these other issues, such as privacy. And going on to Frank Lanterman, our last candidate who ran against Dianne Feinstein was Elizabeth Emken, who is one of the founders of Autism Speaks, who was one of my clients and I'm a personal friend with. I mean, we have got phenomenal candidates that we're running in this state, but they're getting completely washed out because people want to argue about abortion and gay marriage and immigration on issues when even the bulk of the elected officials on the municipal level level in the state of California are Republicans. You know, Lupe's here. We've got other elected officials here in this room that are representing the brand of what it means to be a common sense Republican that gets things done and reforms government, but all we're focusing on are these divisive social issues.
So how
and
do
we
you
wonder
deal,
why we're having a problem.
How do you deal with that? You've got a core of Republicans for whom it really matters what term is used to describe people in the country illegally. You've got a core group of people for whom immigration, illegal immigration, is the biggest issue. How do you deal with the social issues with at least a component of the party that cares so much about it?
I'll pass that to you, Ruben.
Ruben Perales.
Great. That's a great question. I don't know. But I do know that, again, politics is about addition, and you got to build a coalition, as Pete said. So what we've done, we've elected in the just over 2 years that we've been doing Grow, Elect, and building this network, over 90 Latino Republicans to local offices across the state, and we've been doing it by focusing on the issues that matter most in those districts, in those cities, in those counties. If you're running for a school board, city council, or other office, we're not spending a lot of time on ideology. We're spending time on practical problems that people are facing, communities are facing, and we've got candidates that are addressing those issues. So I think that's the model. And I don't know what it looks like overall, but on a statewide basis, and Pete Peterson was probably the most well-qualified person to be Secretary of State for a state like California in a long time that we've ever seen. And unfortunately, for different reasons, the brand being a big part of it and funding being another big part, he didn't win. But I know Republicans will win again. It is cyclical. I mean, I've worked in the White House when there was talk about a Republican majority, a permanent Republican majority, and that didn't materialize. Now the Republicans are back nationally. In California, we have set a trend in politics and technology, on social issues. We tend to set trends, and I think California Republicans are going to need to figure this out, because. And I say this to my colleagues in other states, that earthquake that we felt in California, that demographic earthquake, where now Latinos are the single largest ethnic group in California, it's only a matter of time before that kind of demographic change takes shape in all the other states. And we need to figure out how to win in a diverse state.
Here's what I'm hearing, though, from all of you, that Republican economic proposals and orientation is going to be essential, because the state's going to be in this serious financial trouble with pensions. We need to get off of the social issues. And you're describing a party that sounds to me kind of like how the Republican Party used to be here in California. But that's very different than the Republican Party nationally, where social issues are huge for so many people. So how does this fit together, Pete Peterson?
Well, I think part of the context, you'll be happy to know, Larry, I actually did a little research before this evening. And I looked at, there are exactly 25 states in America that have majority Democratic electorates. And 10 of those 25 states have Republican governors. In fact, there are 3 states that have a larger Democratic majority than California does that all have Republican governors: Maryland, Massachusetts, and New Mexico. So, and then we have states just below us with a plus 15, like a New Jersey and North Carolina, that also have Republican governors. I think part of it, and I know this is going to sound trite, but as someone who got all around this state for the last 18 months, it was amazing to me when I would speak, I heard people say, boy, we don't hear many optimistic Republicans out there. And I think, quite frankly, some of it is just having an optimism both for donors and also for people in the party that this is happening around the country. When Massachusetts, which is plus 30 Democrat registration, just elects Charlie Baker, a Democrat, when Maryland, at about plus 20 Democrat, just elects a Republican, when Illinois just elects a Republican on many of these same issues that we're discussing here around fiscal responsibility, performance, transparency, when California itself has this unique history that we can identify with, I'm super optimistic for the party going forward.
And we have to close this portion of the broadcast on that note, but we will continue for those listening on kpcc.org. We'll have audience question and answer that's web only that you can listen to after this radio broadcast. I want to thank all of you for being with us for this conversation on the radio side. Thank you very much. From all of us at Air Talk, thank you for joining us. We come your way from the Sunnylands Conference Center, and we have more coming up. BBC NewsHour is next here on 89.3. All right, great. We're going to have audience questions now for the next portion of the program. So we have a microphone right here with Liz to take around and over on the other side of the room here. So again, I just asked you to be very succinct. Please no speechifying or just my opinion is this. Good analytical questions, things for our panelists to sink their teeth into. Who'd like to go first? Who wants to kick us off? I see someone right here in the back. If you'd stand up, please. Your first name and where you're from, ma'am.
My name is Julie, and I live in Indian Wells.
Indian Wells, great. Okay, please go ahead.
My question is, I haven't heard anyone talk about the issue of women's reproductive health. And the Republican Party has a history. Nixon signed the Family Planning Act. Lately, it seems that the Republican Party does not support contraceptive availability, sex education, and is preoccupied with the question of abortion, which, while it may be important, doesn't affect all that many people. So I'd be interested in that conversation.
In what the future holds on that issue for the party. Who wants to take that on? Reproductive freedom issue.
Well, I think nationally you're going to have
Pete Peterson?
Yeah, I think you're going to have different states reacting in different ways. I think California, that many of the issues you're talking about, there's going to be more of a liberal approach to that. I still think that, and I say this as someone who adopted my own girl, that I think that part of it is also how we talk about this issue. You know, as someone who adopted a little girl not too far from here, you know, it's known that it's called it in the advertisement that life is a beautiful choice, and I think life is actually a heroic choice. And from adopting from a mother who took a lot of risks and took a lot of courage to go through with her birth, I'm the most grateful father in the world for that. And I think, unfortunately, we're making this about an either-or conversation and not talking about the real life issues that happen.
But I think the question she raises is a really good one, because you can emphasize positive nature of adoption, that everybody is essentially against abortion, doesn't see abortion as a good thing. But when it comes down to the law and what your platform as a party is going to stand for, there's no indication whatsoever that the Republican Party is going to move in a reproductive freedom direction on this.
Yeah,
so,
I had friends over the other night for dinner who are just really dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, and they said, you know, Pete, the problem with Republicans is you care about life up until the birth, and then you don't care about it anymore. And I think some of that is rhetorical, but I think addressing the specific policy issues, in LA County, we have one of the most troubled foster care systems in America. That should be a Republican issue. Adoption, as somebody who's gone through that myself, some of the adoption regulations and making that very difficult and expensive should be a Republican issue. So I think we need to take on the life issue, but not in the sense that we're going to ever overturn Roe v. Wade, because I don't think that's going to happen.
Jack Pitney?
Yeah, let me follow up on what I was saying before and connect this, and that was with the issue of disabilities, because a lot of people in the disability community are pretty ambivalent about this, because what happens if a prenatal test indicates disability? And on the one hand, a lot of people in the community are pro-choice, but they're uneasy with the possibility that people will choose to abort disabled children. So this relates to what I was saying before. It's important for the party to be the party of disabled people, to show that they are supporting people who are disabled in the womb and after the womb, right, when they're born and when they're trying to get jobs.
Another question?
I'll jump in.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Mindy Romero.
As the one female on the panel. Not that I'm speaking for all females, but I will say, I think you just asked a question, what is the Republican Party going to do about that, about the issue of reproductive rights and health? It does matter. That issue matters, and we know that that issue, along with a whole host of other social issues, does very, very much so play into women's choice in the U.S. to lean more Democratic. So overall, California's a little bit different. So women are very Democratic, but as a whole in the U.S., women lean Democratic. If you break it up, it's married white women that lean Republican, and pretty much everybody else. Married women of color, single mothers, single women, period, lean Democratic. And many surveys have told us that, and this is, so we talked about demographic issues, right? We talked about Latinos because that's an obvious one. We talked about youth, but one of the democratic issues or demographic issues that is at play here in California and across the country is the growing, decline in marriage rates and growth in women of color and all of this. So the fact that pretty much if you're not a white woman, you're much more likely to be Democratic. That is a problem for the Republican Party. And issues like reproductive health, though not the only issue, we know economic issues, particularly for single women or single mothers, women are more likely to find themselves in economic situations that are more vulnerable. So those issues are irrelevant and
so
salient.
they want more of a safety net? Is that what you're saying? So
I wouldn't say
family
safety net,
leave
but I would say that we understand that when women look at the two parties, or they hear on the news, or they hear the talk, or they hear the speeches, or whatever it is, economic issues are very relevant for women that find themselves to be more vulnerable. And of the two parties, women are saying that they see more of that in the Democratic Party, more of a place for them. And that's, as those demographics change and grow, then that's going to be an issue. So the reproductive rights are going to have to be addressed head on for the Republican Party, in other words.
Another question? Yes. Yes, sir. Your first name, please, and where are you from?
Thanks. Hi, I'm Larry from Rancho Mirage.
Great.
I'm also Larry.
Very good.
Given that this last election cycle was good for Republicans and bad for Democrats, and that we got completely wiped out on a statewide basis, what's the harm in taking a specific and strong position with regard to pension benefits, a specific position? It would presumably offend almost all Democrats, endear us to almost all Republicans, but gain, the way I see it, at least half of the independent vote.
I don't know why we're not making more of this issue.
Yeah,
I really
you don't know why more isn't being made of it?
I don't, but I understand that unfortunately the way that some Republicans have addressed this issue is made it an anti-government issue. And we got to get away. Pete Wehner, by the way, has a great column in in the New York Times yesterday talking about this. That as often as if we're seen as the anti-government party and we're pushing on this pension issue, we're not going to draw the people that I think that you're talking about that really understand. But if we make relationship with the folks like a Chuck Reed, right? A Democrat, a liberal Democrat who basically took this issue and made it not about trying to hurt government or dismiss public sector workers, but made this an issue about if you care about government and the sustainability of the services we offer, you need to care about this issue. And for the life of me, I don't understand why we're not making this more of an issue.
My answer to that question is stay tuned. There is going to most likely be a statewide ballot initiative in the next election cycle that's going to deal with this. It will most likely be headed by one of my log cabin members in San Diego, former council member Carl DeMaio, who in San Diego successfully led, I think it was Measure BB, that would have realigned the public pension structure in the city of San Diego, and he took a lot of opposition from especially the public employee unions, particularly. After Chuck Reed and Governor Scott Walker, he's probably one of the most recognizable, quote-unquote, pension reformers and people who are trying to reform the structure of public employee unions. It's coming, and I think it's something where California Republicans actually are going to see strong advances. Before, we had just tried to deal with unions by hitting, card check, paycheck protection, In my professional world, I work on a lot of those things, again, trying to limit the undue influence of public employee unions that are bankrupting our state. And I think that the polling and the performance has shown that on pension issues, the public and the vast public here and voters in California are going to be with us. So I believe in the next election cycle, we're actually going to see some pretty serious reform to this public sector pension crisis.
We have someone right back here. Sir, your first name and where are you from?
I'm Philip from La Quinta, or here for my Coachella Valley friends, also Felipe.
Great, very good.
Particularly coming off the Sacramento meeting, could you identify for us leading candidates and prospects that you see for statewide office for the next election? And I'd say we're delighted that Elizabeth Emken's still on the scene. She was a guest in our home here during her campaign swing, but I know that there are many others. Thank you very much.
Well, there are a
Jack
couple of
Pitney.
people on this panel I'd like to see run.
Yeah, any rising stars? I mean,
Well, I think you got to look at a Kevin Faulconer in San Diego. I mean, I think Ashley Swearingen, I think there's no doubt that she's going to be looking at statewide office. I think that when you look at people who have led major cities and led them through difficult times, I think they make a very unique pitch. I'm hearing some rumors that maybe a certain Kevin McCarthy might be looking to come back. And then there's what I was talking about with Ruben, not the Hail Mary pass, but the Hail Condi pass that some people would like to see Condoleezza Rice.
How much of a game changer, if a Condoleezza Rice or some other star?
That's really been the formula in California with Arnold Schwarzenegger, in some of these states that Pete mentioned with a big delta for Republicans. It's been the big star, the Chris Christie, the Rudy Giuliani, who's been a Republican who's been able to win in these heavily Democratic states. That's not a model that's really sustainable, though, you know, so the challenge is really developing grassroots and having leaders, you know, and growing leaders. So that's what we're doing as part of Grow Elect, and others are doing as well, developing the leadership so that they, you know, you can have folks that run on a statewide basis. My only problem is if I would have started Grow Elect about the time that Air Talk started, about 30 years ago, then maybe you know, we'd be in a stronger position.
All right. Right here in the back. Yes, ma'am. Your first name. Where are you from, please?
I'm Rebecca, and I'm from Rancho Mirage.
Rancho Mirage, right close by.
And my question has to do with the NPP voters that Ms. Romero was talking about, and it also dovetails on the idea of grassroots. It seems to me that within the Democratic Party, there are some hot-button, sort of readily available grassroots issues such as the environment and pro-choice that especially NPP voters can kind of fasten on. And so I'm just wondering for the panel what your sense is on a national level of what are some of the key, again, on a national level, grassroots concerns of the Republican Party at this point.
NPP, those are the decline to state voters.
I think jobs is huge. You know, I don't think we're talking much about the fact that as much as we're supposedly in the midst of a California comeback, we still have such a chasm between inland California and coastal California when you're looking at things like unemployment rates. The economist John Husing just did a report on Riverside County in which he found that nationally, manufacturing jobs, which are predominantly lower and middle class jobs, have been growing at a rate of 7% a year over the last 4 years nationally. In California, it's been 0.7%.
Mindy Romero, you want to comment on this?
Oh, I was thinking something a little different along those lines. You know, well, forgive me, I'm just going to change the topic just a wee bit, but I think one of the biggest challenges, though, if we talk about the Republican position on a national level, is the Republican position on a national level for California Republicans. So there needs to be a separation. It's just understanding the reality, particularly for young folks that have come up, right, and come of age in the last 10, 15 years. If they watch the news or they see it online or wherever they see it, much of what they see is national. and they see a government that doesn't work, that doesn't speak, and this is, you could say, across the board, but particularly for younger folks. They see a government that doesn't work. They see, at best, a squabbling Congress, right? At worst, something completely, outrageous and infuriating. And this has really cemented them, right, in terms of one of the reasons why they're going NPP in such huge numbers. And when they are learning about the Republican Party, they often see the language, they hear the language that's used, they see the platform, they hear the discussions, they see the speeches on a national level. So don't discount the power of that, if that makes sense. And for California Republicans to try to distance themselves or at least show how they are different has to be a key part of it.
And we see this with some Democrats, right? Because you have some Democrats who are pro-gun rights Democrats, who are moderate on more issues, who represent swing districts, and are somehow able to put distance between themselves and the Democratic Party platform. Can Republicans in California do that?
They have. Jeff Denham, David Valadao. They are two Republican congressmen in the Central Valley, and I don't know the percentages, but they're in heavily Democratic districts in the Central Valley. And they are examples of Republicans who are elected and re-elected in Democratic districts. Here's the challenge. Most Republicans nationally have very little diversity within their districts. They're very safe. They tend to be very Anglo districts. And they're speaking to their constituents when they're on CNN or Fox News. And there's a disconnect in a very diverse state like California. A lot of their rhetoric does not ring true. And so that's why you'll see folks like Denham and Valadao distancing themselves from the national party on certain issues, immigration reform and things, and kind of charting their own course. And I think it's going to be, they're the models, I think, for successful Republicans in California, ones that can hold on to the base and also appeal to decline to state and Democratic voters.
But as we've seen for Democrats who sort of do the flip side of that, that's very challenging, and you're always at peril of being defeated in your district. Yes, back here.
Oh, hi, I'm Doug from Palos Verdes and Whittier. I'm one of those decline to state and Latino who isn't really keen on either party. And so,
you look like you may be a millennial, too. I don't know.
I'm actually not.
Okay.
I'm older than that. This may sound like blasphemy to our panel, but have you guys ever considered maybe taking cues from the other parties rather than just stand opposed to the other guys? Say, well, we'll take some ideas from the Green Party, Libertarians, from even the Democrats, put all that together and create your ideal candidate, because just putting a Latino in front of me doesn't do anything for me. I don't care. I mean, you're just putting up a front. I need something with substance.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, exactly. We're not under the illusion or delusion that somehow, if we get Latino candidates, then Latino voters will vote for them. We're finding qualified individuals that want to be involved in public life. My slice of the world is finding those that happen to be Hispanic, because I think if you want to, the narrative, the larger narrative that Mindy talked about, that narrative has to include a more diverse party. So when you see pictures from the national convention or the state convention, and it's all, with all due respect, an audience like a KPCC audience, which is a beautiful looking audience, but quite frankly, it's not as diverse as California. And a Republican Party convention, also generally, the perception is it's not as diverse as the rest of California. And so part of it is developing that larger narrative and finding incredible talent that happens to be Hispanic and center-right, and helping them rise up.
Our listening audience actually goes fairly closely to the registered electorate of California overall. Yes. Jack, you want to do, and then Mindy.
Yeah, well, speaking as an old white guy, I would advise the party not to run people like me. I can think of examples. I have a student who, at the age of 18, was the Republican candidate for state assembly. And he's also Asian American. And that's a great example of showing the very opposite of old white guys to the electorate. Now, Nathan didn't win, but running against a very distinguished incumbent, Chris Holden, he was able to get 40% of the vote, and he's going to be back, and he has a great future, and that's an example of what the party should do.
Can I indulge for just a moment? Nathan sent me an email during the campaign, and this is one of the most touching emails I've ever received. He said, I'm this young student, I'm running for Republican office. He said, I grew up listening to your show, and I've been listening since I was a kid, and it helped get me interested in public issues. He wrote this beautiful email. I was so touched that he really got turned on to the idea of public life from, at least in part, listening to the program.
Maybe
and
he ought to bring you into the party.
So
you're recruiting for the party, Larry.
It's called outreach.
That's right. Larry is director of outreach.
Yeah, I'm one of those NPP. Mindy Romero.
Sure. Well, first off, I should state that I, of course, am part of a nonpartisan initiative, and I'm not representing any party today, since you said something about all of us looking beyond the Republican. But more importantly, I think it's just really important to make maybe a couple of points. So in the last, month or so since Senator Boxer made her announcement, I've received a lot of calls from media in terms of what does it mean if a Latino candidate runs, right, for that Senate seat. We know the Latino caucus up in Sacramento, Legislative Caucus, has come out publicly and said they want to see a Latino candidate, whomever that is, because that influences turnout. And it can, but I should emphasize, because you said I think you were saying that just if a candidate is Latino doesn't necessarily matter. So if a candidate is of the same ethnicity or race, it can tell somebody something about that candidate, a shared background, a shared set of experiences. It can get somebody's interest, right? Make you want to learn more. But it's very important to point out that, and we'll just talk about Latinos since we're talking about Latinos, once they have that interest, once they then they definitely seek out information. And just because somebody's Latino doesn't mean that they're going to vote, right, for that. They have to, does the information they get now match up to what they were hoping it would be a shared set of experiences? And we know nationally, I'll defer to you on the California landscape since this is your work, but nationally, Latino Republicans across the country, with the exception of Florida, generally speaking, don't, when they run in districts that are, they're getting support from the typical Republican constituency, and they're not getting a lot of support, or at least not in big numbers, more support from Latinos in those districts, as they are, whatever size the Latino population is. So, so in other words, Republicans also, by running a Latino candidate, that's not necessarily going to help Republicans. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, another
and forgive me, Ruben. Yeah.
Recent poll came out, a Democrat study. It's what the Republicans did after 2012. What happened? How can we come back? Democrats just went through that exercise. They asked Latino voters, do you think the Democratic Party cares about your community? But 33% said they do. Now, granted, Republicans, they asked the same question of Latinos about the Republican Party, only about 12%. But when a community like the Latino community, the conventional wisdom is, well, they're Democrats. Only 33% say we think the Democratic Party cares about us. I think that there's an opportunity there for candidates of either party who actually demonstrate a connection to the community to win votes. And the last thing is that for Republicans, this is the incredible thing. For Republicans to be not just viable, but to win elections in a state like California, you don't need 100% of the Latino vote. You don't need 75% of the Latino vote. You don't even need 50% of the Latino vote. If Republicans on a consistent basis were able to garner high 30 and into the 40 percentile consistently, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
Republicans would be a
but
very, very strong
of course,
party.
that's an enormous hurdle looking at it today to get over that. Charles, real quickly, yeah.
Just to encapsulate this, I think there needs to be a level of authenticity, and we see that in the LGBT community. Just because you're a gay candidate doesn't mean I'm going to vote for you, and just because you're a gay Republican doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to vote for you. You've got to earn it, and I think all of the different constituencies that some of us represent and that we see out there show that you don't have to look like them, you don't have to be the same gender, you don't have to be the same sexual orientation, but you have to show that you care. and that you have to show that you're willing to understand and represent their needs. Everybody's feeling disenfranchised right now, and that's why people are moving away from the parties into the NPP world. It's that disenfranchisement that, the big wigs in Washington, D.C., this Congress, they just don't understand what I'm going through. And if you can show that, if you can really have a meaningful connection to show that I understand, I feel your pain, if you get to that point where you can go into those communities and you're comfortable talking about it, that was just some of the best things that George W. Bush had to offer and Ronald Reagan had to offer, because they showed that they cared. This last weekend at the Republican convention, all the 5 speakers that spoke on behalf of our charter were straight white men. And I mean, again, in conservative straight white men. They understood what we were going through, and they were our best messengers. And I know that the Republican Party, again, if we get out of our shells, if we go and we get out of our enclaves and go and understand that the same battles that we fought are the same ones that other people are fighting, we can make that connection and we can overcome all those different things, that divide us and find something that really unifies us.
We have time for one more. Oh, so many people want to ask questions. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Ellen from Rancho Mirage.
Rancho Mirage,
My question is to all of you, and I'm also referring back to this recent meeting, A Future of California Elections, that was up in Sacramento. No one's talking about election integrity. Pew Research has found that California is one of the worst states in terms of election integrity. I know I work in the election integrity field. Our voter lists are a mess. Our machines are breaking down. I wish Pete Peterson had won, because I think he would have been a great person to fix these problems. But we can do all the outreach we want, and I think it's fabulous what we're talking about. But if our elections aren't fair and honest, and they aren't as accurate as they could be, then what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Pete, you want to take that on first?
Yeah, you just gave me my campaign speech. I felt I was starting to twitch a little bit. I think there was a very interesting poll that came out in October of last year, so it was leading right up to the election, in which Pew asked Californians if you could define what the Secretary of State does, and only 4% could.
4% could
4%.
tell you? That's, wow. It's more than...
So, work with me, Larry, please.
It's an educated electorate.
So,
Start listening.
I don't think, quite frankly, most people even understand that we are the last state in America without a statewide voter database. We are outside of a federal mandate that came on after Bush v. Gore, 13 years ago, that was supposed to deal with these issues. But you bring up a point that I also caught a lot of flack on the campaign trail, which I think goes to another piece here. I was polled several times. I was asked several times on the campaign trail when I was speaking to conservative audiences about voter ID. And I made the pitch then that the problem in California is not that we have too many people voting illegally, it's we don't have enough people voting legally. That's the problem in California. And so as a party, I've said from the beginning, as a Republican Party, we were the party that brought the initiative and referendum here to this state. We were the party that encouraged informed citizenship. And I think that it is an issue. I certainly ran on it, the problems with our voter rolls, the problems with voting technology, which is an oxymoron in California, the problems with civic engagement more broadly when we have maybe we'll have 10%, 12% of LA turn out tomorrow for a citywide election. This, to me, is another issue that Republicans need to be taking on. And take it on not as a question around so much voter integrity, although I think there are some issues there, but an issue of citizenship. Because I think Republicans can speak very easily to this issue of the importance and responsibility of being informed and participating. And unfortunately, I heard from several people who were Democrats who were friends of mine on the campaign trail, you don't sound like a Republican when you're talking about getting more people involved.
Well, the other side of it is, and the issue of voter rolls being a mess, and
which they are.
I think the problem is for the general public, based on when we've talked about this on the show, is they don't see any imminent threat from that. They're not convinced there are large numbers of people fraudulently voting.
Right,
They
right.
might concede that everything is a mess, like you're describing, but they just don't see that as an impact on the actual integrity of who gets elected.
Yeah, well, and I guess in part what I was trying to do in my campaign was really try to connect the two. I mean, when you're outside of a federal mandate, when we are ranked by Pew as running the 49th ranked election system in America, we are 49th on 15 different metrics by Pew. This isn't Reason or Cato, this is Pew. That's something that I think voters, while they may not necessarily think that their vote is being stolen, they should at least care as to the quality that through which elections are being conducted.
Yeah, real quickly, and then I got to wrap.
I was
Yes.
just gonna say, I spoke at the Future of California Elections Conference, yeah. So I'll just echo really quickly that it isn't an issue of voter fraud, election integrity, but I do also see it as an issue of making sure that if we were in compliance, we'd have HAVA money, and we would be able to do so much more, and we'd be able to use an advanced database that to get more folks out to vote. Plus, also through, we have a vote by mail system right here. Now, in the last election, 60% of all votes cast were vote by mail. And we have lots of issues in terms of reporting vote by mail, issues and concerns around rejection rates and disparities amongst different groups and different populations in terms of that. And having a better database period would allow us to be able to make county registrars who do so much with so little, but make them accountable and be able to track their reporting and how they process ballots, and also be able to take that data and be able to get an electorate, be able to target the electorate. States like Denver, who spoke at the conference, were talking about how they use their database in these amazing, incredible ways. They were shaming us. Yeah, they do outreach. They make it so much easier. They use their database as a customer service tool to be able to help the voter through the process and make it not an issue of deadlines, making it's not on the voter's responsibility. It still is in the U.S., generally the voter's responsibility, but using the database to take much of the burden off and be able to make the process easier, which helps everyone, and people don't have to worry about being disenfranchised.
I want to thank all of you so much for being with us. The terrific Mindy Romero, Jack Pitney, Keith Peterson, Charles Moran, Ruben Morales. Thank you all, and thank you for coming out for the conversation from beautiful Sunnylands. Thank you, Sunnylands, for hosting us today. You've been listening to Air Talk Overtime at kpcc.org.